There is a moment before every terrible decision. A tiny voice, somewhere in the back of your brain, quietly whispers one very simple word. Don't. Don't touch that. Don't jump that. Don't try that. It's the built-in safety system evolution spent a few million years installing into your skull. And most of the time, that voice works. It keeps you from licking batteries, fighting vending machines, or testing gravity from dangerous heights. But sometimes, some people either don't hear that voice, or they hear it very clearly and decide to fight it like it insulted their entire bloodline. The result? Not accidents, not bad luck, but a spectacular highlight reel of humanity overriding its own survival instincts with the confidence of a drunk raccoon holding a chainsaw. Tonight we're looking at 10 people who managed to lose a battle against common sense so badly that physics itself had to step in and finish the job. These are not tragic misunderstandings. These are full-power brain malfunctions, moments where pride beat logic, ego beat biology, and gravity patiently waited for its turn. So sit back, because the next 10 stories prove one simple truth about the human species. Evolution gave us intelligence, but apparently not everyone installed the update. 1. The scorpion duel. Have you ever argued with someone so intensely that you felt like your honor was on the line? Maybe over sports, politics, or which pizza place is better. Most disagreements end with yelling, maybe a slammed door, maybe someone refusing to speak to the other person for a week. But two men in Pakistan decided that wasn't nearly dramatic enough. Their argument began during a friendly game of cricket. One of them, let's call him Farouk, accused the other man, Khaled, of cheating. Now, in many cultures, cheating at sports is embarrassing. In theirs, it was apparently a declaration of war. Voices were raised. Friends tried to calm them down, but pride had already taken control of the steering wheel. A rematch was suggested, rejected. A fistfight? Too ordinary. These two pioneers of terrible decision-making needed something more. Definitive. And after a moment of astonishingly creative stupidity, they came up with a solution. A duel. But not with swords, not with pistols. That would be civilized. Instead, they chose something far more intimate. Venomous scorpions. Yes. Their brilliant plan was simple. Each man would hold a live scorpion in his hand. The first person to get stung would be declared the loser, which, somehow, would also prove he was the cheater. Now for a quick biology lesson. The scorpions in that region are not the harmless little desert decorations you poke with a stick. They are essentially tiny armored syringes filled with neurotoxin. Their venom can shut down the human nervous system in minutes. Knowing this, the two men confidently acquired their weapons. A small crowd gathered. Friends watched in disbelief as the two competitors stood face to face, each man holding a very irritated scorpion. The tension was thick. Who would flinch? Who would prove their bravery? Who would win? As it turns out, neither. Within seconds, both scorpions did exactly what scorpions do when grabbed by idiots. They stung, almost simultaneously. The crowd watched as both men suddenly froze. There was a brief shared look between them, the kind of look that says, "This may have been a bad idea." Then the venom got to work. Their muscles locked, their bodies convulsed. Within minutes, both men collapsed. The duel had successfully resolved the argument by proving that both competitors were equally catastrophically stupid. To this day, nobody knows who cheated at cricket, but history will remember one important lesson. When pride fights common sense, pride may win the argument, but common sense is the one that walks away alive.
Nếu sếp muốn, em sẽ viết tiếp này.
Hi. The raccoon trap that caught the wrong animal. Và phần này còn hài đen hơn rất nhiều. Tiếp 2. The raccoon trap that caught the wrong animal. Welcome to the quiet suburbs of Illinois. A peaceful land of trimmed lawns, polite neighbors, and an endless cold war between homeowners and the wildlife that refuses to respect property lines. Our story begins with a man we'll call Bob. Bob had a problem, a raccoon. Now, raccoons are not particularly large animals. They weigh about as much as a bowling ball,
and spend most of their time committing petty theft from garbage cans and bird feeders. To most homeowners, a raccoon stealing birdseed is a minor annoyance. You buy a better feeder, maybe move it, maybe accept that sharing a few sunflower seeds with nature is part of suburban life. But Bob wasn't most homeowners. Bob was an inventor.
The kind of man who looks at a small inconvenience and decides the solution should involve engineering, mechanics, and a level of overconfidence normally reserved for NASA launches. To Bob, the raccoon wasn't just stealing birdseed, it was challenging his authority. And Bob was not about to lose a war against a mammal with tiny hands. So he went into his garage, his laboratory, his temple of questionable problem-solving, and he began building something truly remarkable. Instead of a simple trap, Bob engineered a device that looked like it belonged in a Wile E. Coyote cartoon. It was an elaborate net launching mechanism. There was a tripwire, a tension system, and the launching force? A blank shotgun shell. Yes, Bob decided that the correct response to a 10-pound raccoon stealing birdseed was military-grade pest control. He spent hours perfecting his creation, adjusting angles, testing the wire, admiring the craftsmanship of a man who had successfully brought a cannon to a squirrel fight. Finally, satisfied with his masterpiece, Bob set the trap near the bird feeder. The idea was simple. The raccoon trips the wire, the shotgun shell fires, the net launches, the raccoon is captured. Victory. Bob went to bed that night dreaming of triumph. But the next morning, Bob made one small mistake. He forgot about the trap. After waking up, he drank his coffee, stretched, and looked outside. The bird feeder was empty again. Probably time to refill it. With the cheerful confidence of a man walking into his own ambush, Bob stepped outside. He walked across the yard, directly toward the bird feeder, and straight toward the tripwire he had set just hours earlier. His foot caught the wire. For a split second, his brain probably tried to remember something important, but the trap had already activated. The shotgun shell fired with a thunderous boom. The net launched forward at high speed, and Bob was instantly wrapped up like a Christmas present nobody wanted. The force of the net yanked him off his feet and launched him backward through the air. Unfortunately, his landing zone was not soft grass. It was a heavy stone bird bath. The impact ended Bob's career as a backyard engineer immediately. His masterpiece had worked perfectly. The trigger fired, the net deployed. The target was captured. The only minor issue was that the target was Bob. Meanwhile, the raccoon, who likely witnessed the entire event from a nearby tree, probably waited patiently until the noise stopped, then calmly climbed down and enjoyed a peaceful breakfast. Because sometimes, in the great war between man and nature, nature doesn't even have to fight. It just waits for humans to defeat themselves. The beer heist versus the laws of glass. Now let's move from suburban engineering disasters to a place where bad decisions thrive after midnight. The convenience store. A glowing island of fluorescent lights, stale hot dogs, and impulse choices that rarely improve anyone's life. This is where we meet a man we'll call Dave. Dave had a goal, a very simple one: free beer. Now, stealing beer from the convenience store is not exactly a complicated crime. People have been doing it badly for decades. The plan usually involves 3 steps: walk in, grab beer, run out. Unfortunately, Dave's brain had only fully processed the first 2 steps. Late one evening, Dave entered the store and headed straight for the cooler. He grabbed a full case of beer and clutched it to his chest like a running back holding the Super Bowl trophy. So far, everything was going according to plan. Then he turned toward the exit. Standing near the counter was the store clerk. Now, the clerk didn't tackle him, didn't call the police, didn't even move. He simply said one word: "Hey." And that single word caused Dave's brain to instantly enter full panic mode. Adrenaline flooded his system. Logic packed its bags and left the building. His mission immediately changed from steal beer to escape at all costs. He saw the glass entrance doors. Freedom. The night sky was visible through them. In Dave's rapidly collapsing thought process, that meant one thing: the door must be open. For those unfamiliar with basic physics, here's an important concept. Glass is transparent.
but it is also extremely solid. In fact, store doors are specifically designed to stop people from doing exactly what Dave was about to attempt. But Dave didn't slow down. He didn't reach for the handle. He didn't even hesitate. He lowered his head, tightened his grip on the beer, and sprinted, full speed, directly at the door.
From the security camera's perspective, it must have looked like a man attempting to tackle an invisible wall. The collision was immediate and absolute. There was no cartoonish bounce, no dramatic pause, just the brutal, final sound of human momentum meeting reinforced glass. The impact snapped his neck instantly. Dave collapsed to the floor. The beer case flew from his hands, bursting open. Cans rolled across the linoleum floor. A few of them cracked open, slowly fizzing as foam spread across the tiles. The clerk stood there in stunned silence. Because sometimes, the universe handles a problem without needing assistance. Dave had attempted to steal beer. Instead, he became a permanent reminder of a very important rule. When you run headfirst into modern engineering, the engineering usually wins. No sip moon, em se vit tip ngay. Bon, the salvage divers and the falling anchor. Bastori nai konden va cinematic hunyo. Tip, bon, the salvage divers and the falling anchor. Let's move now from convenience stores and shattered glass to a place where mistakes are even less forgiving, the ocean floor. Our next story involves two brothers working in the dangerous world of illegal underwater salvage. Their names don't matter much now, so we'll call them Marco and Paolo. Their business model was extremely simple. Find old shipwrecks, cut out valuable metal, sell it for scrap. No permits, no safety inspections, just 2 diving suits, some cutting torches, and a very flexible definition of good idea. One afternoon, the brothers discovered a promising wreck sitting quietly on the seabed. It wasn't treasure they were after. No pirate gold, no ancient artifacts, just copper plating attached to the hull of the ship. Copper sells well, and copper doesn't ask questions. So the brothers descended into the dark water with their tools and began working. Their equipment included industrial cutting torches capable of burning through steel at temperatures of nearly 3,000 degrees. Underwater, the torches hissed and crackled as they sliced through the metal hull, turning the surrounding water into a cloud of bubbling steam. They were focused, efficient, confident. But there was one small detail neither brother had noticed when choosing their work location. They were cutting metal directly beneath the ship's massive anchor. The anchor itself weighed several tons and was hanging above them, suspended by a rusted chain that had spent decades slowly decaying in salt water. Now let's pause for a quick physics lesson. Principle number 1. Cutting torches make metal extremely hot. Principle number 2. Old rusted metal becomes very weak when heated. And principle number 3. Gravity is patient. But gravity never loses. As the brothers worked, the intense heat from their torches slowly traveled upward through the metal. Link by link, the anchor chain began to warm. Then it began to glow. Then it began to weaken. But underwater, sound travels strangely. The groaning metal was drowned out by the roar of their own equipment. Marco and Paolo never noticed the chain slowly approaching its breaking point. Until it finally did. There was no dramatic explosion, no warning, just a quiet metallic snap. Above them, the massive anchor began to fall. In water that deep, the descent was almost silent. One moment the brothers were cutting copper. The next moment, a multi-ton shadow was descending directly toward them. There was no time to move, no time to react. Just a brief instant where the light disappeared above their heads. And then gravity finished the story. When investigators later examined the wreck, they found something grimly ironic. The brothers had successfully removed several pieces of copper plating. Their job was technically complete, but in the process, they had become part of the shipwreck themselves, flattened beneath the very anchor designed to keep the ship from moving. A permanent reminder that when you decide to work under a several-ton object hanging from a rusted chain, you are placing an extraordinary amount of trust in gravity's sense of humor.
Nếu sếp muốn, em sẽ tiếp tục viết. 5. The selfie with the blue-ringed octopus.
Story này còn đen hơn nhiều, vì nó liên quan tới một trong những sinh vật độc nhất thế giới. Tiếp 5. The selfie with the blue-ringed octopus.
Now we travel to a place where nature has perfected the art of smiling politely while trying to kill you. Australia, a continent where even the most beautiful creatures are often just highly efficient venom delivery systems with good marketing. This is where we meet a young traveler we'll call Jessica. Jessica was the kind of person who documented everything. Sunsets, coffee, shoes on the beach. If something existed in front of her, it had a strong chance of ending up on social media. One afternoon, she was exploring a coastal tide pool, those shallow pockets of water left behind when the ocean pulls back. To most people, tide pools are fascinating little ecosystems, tiny fish, shells, sea stars, but to Jessica, they were content opportunities. Then she saw it. Resting quietly on a rock beneath the water was a tiny octopus, barely the size of a golf ball, and across its small body flashed a series of brilliant neon blue rings. They pulsed like glowing jewels. To someone with basic survival instincts, this display would immediately trigger alarm bells. In the animal kingdom, bright colors almost always mean the same thing. I am extremely poisonous. Please reconsider your life choices. But Jessica didn't see a warning. She saw a perfect photo opportunity. Because what could possibly go wrong with holding a tiny, adorable sea creature? Now, for anyone unfamiliar with marine biology, the blue-ringed octopus is one of the most venomous animals on Earth. Its bite delivers a powerful neurotoxin called tetrodotoxin. There is no antivenom, and the bite itself is usually painless. So painless, in fact, that victims often don't even realize they've been bitten. Jessica, blissfully unaware of this information, reached down into the tide pool and gently scooped up the tiny octopus. It was beautiful. Its rings glowed even brighter now, flashing like warning lights on a nuclear reactor. But Jessica interpreted this less as a death threat and more as excellent lighting for a selfie. She placed the tiny creature on her forearm, raised her phone, tilted her head, smiled. Behind her stretched the ocean. On her arm sat one of the most dangerous animals on the planet. It was the perfect shot. She took several photos, adjusting angles and framing like a professional influencer. At some point during this photo shoot, the octopus did what threatened animals tend to do. It bit her. The bite was tiny, almost nothing. Jessica barely felt it. Satisfied with the pictures, she gently placed the octopus back in the water and walked away. For a few minutes, everything seemed fine. Then her lips began to tingle. Her fingers went numb. Her vision blurred. What she didn't realize was that the toxin had already begun shutting down her nervous system. Tetrodotoxin blocks the signals between nerves and muscles, which means the body slowly loses the ability to move or breathe. Jessica collapsed onto the sand, fully conscious, but unable to move, unable to speak, unable to call for help. Her respiratory system slowly shut down, and within minutes, the ocean breeze carried away the last breath of a woman who had just taken the most perfectly framed photo of her own killer. Somewhere in the tide pool, the tiny octopus went back to hiding beneath its rock, because nature had already posted its own message. Bright colors are not decorations, they are warnings. And if the animal is small, beautiful, and glowing like a neon sign, it's usually best not to pick it up for Instagram. 6. The artist who became an ant buffet. Art is a fascinating thing. Sometimes it's a painting, sometimes it's a sculpture, and sometimes it's a man making a decision so unbelievably bad that people spend years arguing whether it was genius or just extremely poor judgment. Our next subject was an Italian performance artist we'll call Lorenzo. Lorenzo believed that true art should challenge boundaries, push limits, question humanity's relationship with the natural world. Unfortunately, Lorenzo also believed that the best way to do this was by covering himself in honey and lying down on an ant hill. Yes, that was the concept. His artistic vision was to demonstrate the harmony between humans and nature, to become part of the ecosystem, to blur the line between observer and participant. Which sounds very poetic, until you remember that ants are not known for appreciating performance art. To prepare for his masterpiece, Lorenzo purchased a large container of organic honey, only the best, for his six-legged collaborators. He then located a large, thriving ant colony in a grassy field, thousands upon thousands of ants moving in perfect organized chaos. To most people, this would be a place you walk around. To Lorenzo, it was a stage. He invited a few friends to witness the performance. They reportedly reacted the way most people do when someone explains an idea involving insects and bodily fluids, with deep concern. But Lorenzo waved away their doubts. Great art always faces resistance. The day arrived. Under the warm Italian sun, Lorenzo removed his clothing and began carefully pouring honey across his body. Arms, chest, legs, every inch coated in sticky golden sweetness. Then, with the calm confidence of a man who clearly skipped several important biology lessons, he walked to the anthill and lay down, directly on top of it. For the ants, this moment was nothing short of a miracle. Imagine if an entire buffet suddenly appeared in the middle of your city. That was essentially what had just happened. Within seconds, thousands of ants swarmed him. They crawled across his arms, his chest, his legs, attracted by the honey like tiny sugar-addicted tourists. At first, Lorenzo remained perfectly still. This was part of the performance, a symbol of unity between species, a meditation on coexistence. But there was one small problem Lorenzo hadn't considered. He had a severe allergy to ant venom. You see, ants bite, and many species inject formic acid when they do. One bite is annoying. 10 bites are painful. Several thousand bites at once is a biological disaster. Within minutes, Lorenzo's body began reacting violently. His skin erupted in hives. His throat started swelling. His breathing became difficult. He was entering anaphylactic shock. The serene artist lying peacefully among nature suddenly transformed into a man frantically attempting to escape thousands of extremely enthusiastic insects. But by the time his friends realized the situation was serious, Lorenzo was already struggling to breathe. His airway closed, his body shut down, and the performance ended far sooner than expected. When authorities later arrived, they found something that looked less like modern art and more like a very unfortunate picnic. Lorenzo had hoped to become one with nature, and in a way, he succeeded, just not in the way he planned, because sometimes the difference between being an artist and being lunch is nothing more than a thin layer of honey.
Tip bite. The world's worst joke.
Every friend group has one. The guy who believes he is the funniest person in the room, the prankster, the comedian, the human embodiment of, "Relax, bro, it's just a joke." Unfortunately, humor becomes a lot less funny when it involves loaded firearms. Our next story takes place in a basement somewhere in Illinois. Two friends, we'll call them Gary and Kevin, were doing what millions of people do on slow evenings. Absolutely nothing productive. They were sitting around, talking, laughing, killing time. At some point during this thrilling evening of inactivity, Gary decided he wanted to make things more interesting, and he knew exactly how. He grabbed a handgun. Now, there are a few extremely simple rules when it comes to guns. Rules taught to anyone who has ever taken even the most basic safety course. Rule 1. Treat every gun as if it's loaded. Rule 2. Never point a gun at anything you are not willing to destroy. Rule 3. Keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to fire. These rules exist because the alternative is usually catastrophic. Gary, however, apparently believed these were more like polite suggestions. He picked up the gun and pointed it directly at Kevin. Kevin laughed. Because when you're used to someone being an idiot, sometimes you forget that idiots occasionally cross the line from annoying to fatal. Gary, playing the role of comedian, put on a serious face. He looked Kevin directly in the eye and said the 6 words that have appeared in far too many tragic stories. "Don't worry, man, it's not loaded." Now here's the critical moment. Gary never checked. Because checking would mean admitting he might be wrong. And Gary clearly had complete faith in his own memory. To complete the joke, Gary decided he needed a dramatic punchline, so he pulled the trigger. In that microscopic fraction of a second, reality corrected Gary's confidence. The loud crack that filled the room was not the empty click he expected. It was the sound of gunpowder igniting, a bullet leaving the barrel at over 1,000 feet per second, and the immediate, irreversible end of the joke. Kevin collapsed instantly. The laughter in the room disappeared. Gary stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, the horrible truth settling in faster than his brain could process it. His prank had worked. He had surprised his friend, just not in the way he intended. The silence that followed was far more powerful than any punchline Gary could have imagined. Because when you gamble with a loaded gun, the house doesn't laugh. The house always wins. Tip 8. The bench press versus ego. Late at night, gyms become strange places. The crowds thin out. The music echoes through empty rooms. And the remaining lifters are usually the ones chasing something bigger than exercise. Personal records, respect, or in the case of our next protagonist, immortality in the local gym legend Hall of Fame. Meet Hector. Hector was a bodybuilder, not the casual kind who lifts weights for health. Hector lifted for glory. His life philosophy was simple: lift more weight today than you did yesterday. And tonight, Hector had a goal: a massive bench press personal record. He approached the bench like a gladiator entering an arena. Plate after plate slid onto the barbell. 45 pounds. Another 45. Then another. The bar slowly transformed into something that looked less like gym equipment and more like construction machinery. Nearby lifters glanced over, some with curiosity, others with concern. Because anyone who has spent time in a gym knows one very important rule. When lifting extremely heavy weights, you bring a spotter. A spotter is the person who stands nearby, ready to grab the bar if something goes wrong. In other words, a spotter is the thin line between a successful lift and becoming a cautionary poster on the wall. But Hector didn't want a spotter. To him, asking for help was admitting weakness. And Hector's ego weighed significantly more than the barbell. So he lay down on the bench alone. The overloaded bar hovered above him like a steel guillotine. He gripped the bar tightly, took a deep breath, and lifted it off the rack. For a moment, everything looked impressive. The weight descended slowly to his chest, controlled, steady. The first half of the lift was perfect. Then came the hard part. He pushed. Every muscle in his chest, arms, and shoulders fired at once. The bar moved upward. An inch, then another. His arms trembled violently, his face twisted into a mask of pure effort. For a brief moment, it looked like he might actually succeed. But gravity has an undefeated record. His muscles hit their limit. The bar stalled. The shaking became worse. And then the inevitable happened. His strength gave out completely. The massive barbell crashed down, not onto his chest, but directly across his neck. The impact was immediate, brutal, absolute. In the quiet gym, the echo of metal striking bone ended Hector's pursuit of greatness. When people later talked about the incident, they didn't mention the weight he tried to lift. They talked about the mistake. Because Hector didn't die from weakness, he died from something far heavier: pride. In the end, the strongest man in the room was defeated by the one weight no one should ever try to lift alone: their own ego. Dipchin, the all-night study strategy. Now let's travel to one of the most dangerous environments known to young adults: the college dorm during finals week. A place where sleep disappears, panic spreads like wildfire, and thousands of students suddenly attempt to compress an entire semester of knowledge into a single, desperate night. Our next contestant in the Human Decision-Making Olympics was a student we'll call Kyle. Kyle had a very simple philosophy about school. Why study a little every week when you can panic study everything at once? For months, Kyle had ignored lectures, postponed assignments, and developed an extremely healthy relationship with procrastination. But now the final exam was just hours away, and Kyle had a problem. He knew absolutely nothing. Most students in this situation might accept defeat, maybe skim a few notes, maybe pray. Kyle had a different plan, a chemical one. Spread across his desk was his entire study strategy: a stack of high-octane energy drinks and a bottle of caffeine pills. To Kyle, this wasn't dangerous. This was efficiency. He wasn't going to sleep. He was going to stay awake all night and force his brain into maximum performance. Now, let's pause for a quick biology lesson. Caffeine is a stimulant. In small doses, it increases alertness. In very large doses, it turns your heart into something resembling a malfunctioning drum solo. The human body can handle about 400 milligrams of caffeine per day safely. Kyle was about to attempt something closer to 5 times that amount. The night began. One energy drink, then a caffeine pill. The surge of energy hit instantly. Kyle felt unstoppable, focused, sharp, like a genius finally unlocking his potential. He started reading notes at high speed. Second drink, third drink, another pill. The words on the page seemed to fly into his brain. At least, that's what it felt like. In reality, his body was sending out increasingly desperate warning signals. His hands trembled. His leg bounced uncontrollably. His heart began hammering in his chest like it was trying to escape. But Kyle ignored it, because in his mind, the strategy was working. Fourth drink. Sixth. Eighth. By the time he reached his 10th can, Kyle had entered a state somewhere between extreme focus and complete physiological chaos. His heart was racing at a speed it was never designed to sustain. His nervous system was fully overloaded. But Kyle had one final drink left, the victory lap. He grabbed the last can, cracked it open, and took a long, triumphant sip. And at that exact moment, his heart gave up. Not gradually, not gently, but suddenly. After hours of chemical abuse, the overworked muscle simply stopped functioning properly. Kyle collapsed forward onto his desk, his head landing directly in his open textbook. The next morning, his roommate found him there, surrounded by a battlefield of empty cans. A silent monument to the most aggressive study plan ever attempted. Kyle had spent the entire night trying to pass his exam, but in the end, he failed the only test that truly mattered: basic survival. If xếp muốn, em sẽ viết story 10, Piranha Dare. Cái kết cực đen và rất cinematic. Rồi sau đó là mini outro cộng comment bait để kết video giữ retention. Tip 10. The Piranha Show-Off. Finally, we travel to Brazil. A beautiful river. Warm sunlight reflecting off the water. Birds overhead. A perfect romantic afternoon. Our final contestant was a young man we'll call Ricardo. Ricardo was spending the day with his girlfriend on the banks of the river. They were enjoying the scenery, the quiet sound of flowing water, the peaceful atmosphere. But Ricardo had a problem. He didn't want to just enjoy the moment. He wanted to impress. Because sometimes, when a man is trying to prove how fearless he is, logic quietly leaves the room. As they stood near the edge of the river, Ricardo spotted something moving in the water. A flash of silver. A fish. Not just any fish, a piranha. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with piranhas, they are not the giant monsters movies sometimes portray, but they are extremely efficient predators. Their jaws are lined with razor-sharp teeth designed for one purpose: cutting flesh. To most people, the sight of a piranha would be a reminder to keep their hands out of the water. To Ricardo, it looked like an opportunity. He turned to his girlfriend with a grin and said the 4 words that have started countless disasters throughout human history. "Hey, watch this." Ignoring her nervous protests, Ricardo stepped into the river. His plan was unbelievably simple. He was going to catch the piranha with his bare hands. Why? Because in his mind, this would be legendary. He slowly moved through the shallow water, eyes locked on the fish. The piranha darted back and forth. Ricardo lunged. His hand splashed into the water, and incredibly, he actually caught it. He pulled his hands up, holding the wriggling fish in triumph. For a brief moment, Ricardo was exactly what he wanted to be, a hero. He held the piranha up proudly, showing it to his girlfriend like a trophy. But the piranha did not share Ricardo's excitement. Cornered, angry, equipped with a mouthful of surgical blades, it did what piranhas do. It bit him. Hard. The wound was small, Just a quick slice across his finger. But it was enough, because when the first drop of blood hit the river, something changed. The calm water around Ricardo's legs began to ripple, then churn, then explode into movement. Piranhas are not solitary hunters. They travel in schools, and the scent of blood spreads through water like an alarm bell. Within seconds, dozens of fish converged on the source. Ricardo's triumphant grin disappeared, replaced instantly by confusion, then fear, then pure terror. The water around him erupted into a frenzy of flashing silver bodies and snapping jaws. What had been a peaceful river seconds earlier became a boiling storm of feeding fish. Ricardo tried to run, but the attack was already underway. The bites came rapidly. Legs, hands, every movement only stirred the water more and stirred the fish into greater frenzy. His girlfriend could only watch from the riverbank in horror as Ricardo's attempt to impress her turned into the most brutally effective demonstration of food chain dynamics imaginable. Within moments, the water turned red. The swarm moved with terrifying speed, and the river finished the story Ricardo had started. He had succeeded in catching a piranha, but in the process, he also managed to become the rest of their lunch. Now, let's be honest. None of these people thought they were about to die. Every single one of them believed they were doing something clever, brave, impressive. But the universe runs on a very simple operating system. Confidence writes the plan, but physics writes the ending. And physics has never once accepted an appeal. Comment bait/CTA. Now I'm curious, which one of these disasters made you think, yeah, that one was unbelievably stupid? The scorpion duel? The raccoon trap? The piranha dare? Drop the number in the comments. No judgment, mostly. And if these stories convinced you to keep listening to that tiny voice in your head that says, don't do that, hit like, subscribe. And remember, every warning label exists because someone already tested the alternative.